Welcome to Good Humans Podcast, Paul Field.
Thank you.
How you going, mate?
I'm really good, thank you.
Mate, thank you so much for being here. This is a really exciting chat for me. You have an incredible career, an incredible story, a very heartbreaking, I guess, story through times, but I think there's going to be some beautiful moments to educate people and to learn from your experience. You were the original manager for the Wiggles. Your brother's in the Wiggles. Your son is now the manager of the Wiggles, which every single Australian and probably most of the people on this planet know who the Wiggles are.
True.
But we kind of touched on real quickly before we jumped on air, which we will get into later in the stories. The Wiggles actually kind of started from your tragedy a little bit, from losing your daughter to SIDS, which we will catch up to in this story. But the question I do start all of my podcasts with is, what are you grateful for right now, today in your life?
A lot. And the immediate thing is my family. So starting with my wife, and we're in a great zone now where we've technically retired from the workforce, but I still do stuff. So does Pauline. But you know, we woke up and then we both said, you know what, we'll stay here for a while. And I would not be anywhere else on the planet than just holding each other in bed. It's the warmest. It's the best. There's no drug could take you there. It's just, I love that. And you know, clearly, even when we're out of bed, it's great. But also, we've got 4 children on the ground at the moment, and 3 grandchildren. And so we're very hands on with them. And seriously, it's like an injection.
Wow.
Just I can't tell you enough. I don't have the words. They're just, and we, as I said, we're with them a lot, and just holding them, hugging them when they're talking to you. It's just life-giving, and none of us need a tap on the shoulder to say life's short. And that's tattooed on our brains and hearts, right? You know, and even now we've got mates who have gone, whose mates' partners have gone, and my elder sister went just a few years ago. So we're pretty mindful, you know, of that. And as I say, that's the main thing that just pumps my heart.
Mate, I love it. It's so beautiful the way you put that. And the day we're recording this episode, I think within the last 2 or 3 hours, become an uncle for the first time. So my mum and dad have become grandparents for the first time. So just hearing the way that you explained that, my mum and dad have been so excited to become grandparents. So my beautiful older sister, as of pretty much, I think, the last few hours, we haven't got the update, but she had an epidural about 7 hours ago, and she was, giving birth. So just hearing you say that, I know my mum and dad are so excited. I'm in Sydney recording this episode. My mum flew to the Gold Coast this morning where my sister's having the baby. My dad's in Sydney with me where my mum and dad live, but he's flying back up to the Gold Coast tomorrow with me to be there. So all happening for Team Chapman and Team Fisher as well. So they got me very excited. So thanks for sharing that gratitude.
Oh, it's you know, when you fall in love, it's all encompassing.
Wow.
That's probably the best description if you haven't had a grandchild. Same with children, but grandchild's a different level too. Because you've pretty much been through everything. Doesn't mean you don't have fears or anything, particularly with us. But yeah, it's just life and love giving.
That's so amazing. Yeah, my sister's had like 5 years of infertility, 4 miscarriages, IVF, almost did surrogacy, and then magically got pregnant just naturally. And now she gave birth today. So it's a special one. So I'll be meeting my first little niece or nephew in the next 24, 48 hours, which is very exciting.
Mate,
but
fantastic.
Mate, we're here to talk about your story today, and there's so many things I want to get into, but we're going to try and work our way through this in a way that can share your story, in a way, hopefully, that can educate people a bit around some topics, but also learn about the Wiggles, because everybody knows about the Wiggles, and you bloody started them. So let's go back to the start. Tell me about your upbringing, childhood, high school. What do I need to know? Like, let's talk up until you're finishing high school that will maybe make me understand a bit more about you, music, what you were like as a kid.
So a rat bag is the short answer on that. But I'm one of 7 children, right? And interestingly enough, my mum, Mari, and my dad, John, lost their first child, Mary, who was stillborn. Now, that's interesting. And Mum grieves to this day, you know, for Mary. And so when Maria came along, oh, my goodness, right, you know, the royal births have nothing on the Field family births, right? So she was much celebrated, as we all were. And it sounded like I grew up in the 1930s, but in the 60s, we didn't have a TV for a few years. So Mum was a great muso, right? And she would play piano, play records, and engage us through music. And she still to this day said, learning to play music and enjoy music is as important as learning to read and write. Okay, and she was dead right. Okay, because surfing or footy or whatever you do, you can get to the age where it's no longer possible or whatever. Music you can appreciate till you flatline. So we're all taught musical instruments. It was part of our life, still is. The only speeding tickets Mum has ever got, and she's 91 now, by the way, so she stopped driving, folks, a while ago. You're safe out there. Was when she'd put on music and she'd crank it louder than we would do the Stones, Wow. It just lives for it. Anyway, so that was great. We all learned instruments. We learned to play. Dad was a pharmacist in the local area. And it was a housing commission area. We weren't in need of a housing commission house, but that was the area where we had a house and Dad had his practice. And actually, when we were young kids in 1969, Dad had a massive heart attack, right? And it is, I'll use the word a miracle, he survived. We were literally out about 45 minutes away from our house at a footy game, and he was our coach, of course, right? And Dad was classic type A, right? Ran a pharmacy, ran the parents and friends, coached the footy team, did housey on a Friday night, and smoked 4 packs a day of cigarettes. Don't do that. Anyway, so we're out at this game. The ref hadn't turned up, and we were the under 8s or 9s, something like that, so no big deal, right? So Dad said, "I'll ref," right? He went on. And at half time, he had massive chest pains, right? Nowadays, if that happened, the under 8s or 7s would have said, "Call an ambo," right? In those days, he lay in the back, and I remember the name of Mr. Perusic's van, station wagon, till the second half finished. Then they drove him back home. I mean, strike a light. Wow. And being a pharmacist in a western suburbs, he knew all the doctors, they were mates of Dad's. And Dr. O'Connor came up, said, "Call the priest," which was always a bit of a worry. Yeah, wow. And, of course, they called the ambo. And lucky for us, Blacktown Hospital had just opened either that year or, not far from that moment. The ambulance came, and to show how things have advanced, and Ambo wouldn't say this to the wife of a patient these days, but he said as he took Dad away, "Mrs. Field, you must know he can't survive." Wow. So anyway, he was taken to hospital. They brought him back, and Dad didn't tell me this till decades later. When a bloke I know who's a real straight down the line guy said, and he had a heart attack, and I asked him what was that like, and he told me, and he said, I could see them working on me, and I was like, bloody hell, this guy's no BS, right, and just real straight down the line. So I rang Dad and said, "Hey, Dad, this bloke you knew." He said, "Yeah, that happened to me." I thought, "Why didn't you tell us this?" He said, "I could honestly see them working on me," and he said, "I had a choice." And this is real trippy. And he said, "It wasn't, I got 7 kids, a pharmacy and blah, 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 blah. It wasn't of this world, so to speak. I could have gone, though, and he didn't. And I don't know that was, as I said, like a decision that we'd make here, but thank God he didn't go. And so, yeah, he became the world's most adamant non-smoker. Wow. And he was a deeply spiritual guy. And when he did survive, obviously, but he had a tough go shortly for a while after. Once you've kind of faced your mortality, you reassess everything. Yeah. And he said, "You know what? I want to do something to pay the rent for living here. I got to do some community good." So drugs in the western suburbs, this is in the early 70s, had just started, like in the cross, it really started because of the Vietnam War. But he saw there's a real need for that. And kids that he would weigh in the pharmacy as babies and so on were suddenly early teens and whatever else. And so he started to go to schools way before life education and educate kids about the use and abuse of drugs. Wow. Which was so intelligent at the time. Rather than drugs are bad, it was like, no, drugs can be a great thing. They saved my life. They, antibiotics, all that kind of stuff, and but also you can abuse them. And he was way ahead of his time because he also used to say, who do you picture as a drug addict, right? And he, because we were all Stones fanatics, he'd go, I'm sure you're picturing Keith Richards on the ground and, that kind of stuff. It's actually your Auntie Sally who's downing Beck's by the hour and whose kidney is going to turn into a stone. He said that's a drug and that's it being abused. It was a really good education. And he also got to the stage of dispensing methadone for heroin addicts in his shop, right, in the pharmacy, which, boy, that's a thankless task, and good on him, And he also worded us up big time where he knew in your life you get offered stuff, right? And he just said, this is the only time. He said it for cigarettes because as a primary school kid, that was the real, danger from Dad's point of view. And I don't put inverted commas, it is a bloody danger, right? And he said, that's when you can lie. He said, you get offered stuff that you know is not good for you, say anything. Tell them you're allergic. Tell them whatever. And I thought, geez, that's good, right? Bloody good tips out there, folks, right?
Yeah,
and for a kid who'd experienced nothing really, it was great. And then it was interesting, so he dispensed methadone for a number of years, would give lectures in high schools and so on, talks, I should say. Yeah. And then one day, he did some further education, always expanding the brain, and some of the crooks and addicts around the area noticed he was gone at certain hours, so started to hold the shop up, right, as in Robert, at knife point or whatever else. And then so he put the valuable drugs and all the rest of it, or the drugs that people would abuse themselves with, in a safe. They took the safe, so he dug it in. Eventually, it was in the cement, like you do open a safe and it'd be underneath there. And anyway, these two guys came in with a gun, a rifle. And Dad's originally a country boy. He's from Cobar, so he grew up shooting rabbits, very practical kind of guy. And I'll give you an example of that in a sec, but this is a pretty bloody good one too. Anyway, so they came out the front and the girls serving there were there, and he pointed the gun at them and then yelled at Dad, like, give us whatever they asked for or they get it, right? And he was infuriated, like bloody cowards, right, And then they turned the gun on him. And again, was just impulse and rage. He grabbed the gun with his left hand and thumped the guy with his right, right? And so he got the gun off him, right? And he was just so angry. And anyway, they laid into him. And Dad wore glasses and it smashed and cut himself. And he went onto the ground. And because he had their weapon, they ran off, right? But being the Cobar boy and furious, he ran after them, pointed the gun at them and fired it, right? And to quote my dad, he's gone now, so he can't be sued. I had the bastard lined up to be a quadriplegic. Right? Oh. So he was pissed off at that. Anyway, there was nothing in the chamber, thankfully, right? I mean, I don't want to make light of firing at someone. Yeah. And these guys were desperate, as people, who were jonesing for a drug can be, And they literally got knives and went over the railway line and held up a chemist there. They eventually got done for it. So... And we would help Dad in the shop. I call it the shop at the pharmacy during holidays, and which is a good experience on a lot of levels. But the good thing for growing as a person and that awareness of the use and abuse of drugs, it was great. Man, we were educated in everything, right? And I always asked, what's that? And you hear the explanation, oh, okay, like with things. And we'd have customers come in with their kids. And clearly the woman would be, and I didn't know what was happening, but she was just kind of tripping for my context, man. I'm thinking, and she'd go out and I said, Dad, what's the matter with her? She's into like the equivalent of Valium and the rest of it. Then I went, now. And he said, he would always say, the poor woman, right? It wasn't looking down. It's like the poor girl's got a problem, So there was always that compassion and empathy. He would write references for people who were on the program when they ended up in court. So he was a good man, and when I say we're ratbags, but when we get in trouble in school, compared to my wife, got in trouble in school, her mum and dad, who are wonderful people, would say, you need to do this, that, and the other, and we'd say, the teacher's a flip, he does this, that, and the other. And they go, yeah, fair enough. He'd be on our side.
Yeah.
Can't tell you the difference that makes, And
Sounds like you're a great team. I just love how much this is setting this story up, and I am going to try and bring us to the next stage because I know you speak so well in your storytelling. I wish we had like hours to do this, but I know we're on a bit of a time schedule. But I just think this sets up so beautifully the way you explained your mother really introduced the music.
Oh, yeah.
And your father, because we're going to get into the story where you're rock stars, you and your brothers, and to have this education around drugs, and especially in that era, I'm sure you're around many, many, many drugs. Yeah. To have that personal experience and your dad to have gone through the heart attack and then gone into educating kids around it, I'm sure there was so many subconscious lessons and conscious lessons that you were taught that you were so grateful for moving into that next part of your life. Yeah. We're going to speed now through school. You're a bit of a rat bag, but you probably got through it all right.
Yeah, we did, yeah.
Is the Cockroaches pretty much straight after school?
During it, actually.
During school, yeah. So tell me about the Cockroaches, a band that maybe not everyone knows about, but a lot of people know.
Probably do.
Yeah, my parents definitely do, and a lot of people know that the Wiggles came from the Cockroaches. It's kind of, I guess, the folklore story of it.
Yeah.
Tell me about the Cockroaches.
Well, again, we were music fanatics. I live for it. And the Stones particularly, we'd buy bootlegs.
The Rolling Stones.
Yeah. And I tell you a good example, we were actually, because Dad was from the bush, he went to a boarding school, so we actually did as well, right? And this is how good of a bloke he was, right? And also back to one of his themes was if your kid or you're into something, if there's something you enjoy, let them go with it, right? If it's a good thing.
Yeah.
And I remember the Stones had a new live album come out, right? And in those days, there was no streaming. You had to go to a record shop and get either a tape or an album. He brought the tape down to us at lunchtime and played it to us in his car. I mean, I still remember it. What a guy.
Sick. That's so cool. That's like my dad coming to pick me up when the waves are good at the surf and take me to surf instead at lunchtime and finish early.
Yeah, absolutely. Music was our refuge. I mean, when I say refuge, it's what we live for.
You loved it.
And so we mucked around in school and put a show on for the rest of the boys, that type of stuff. And then my first year or so out of school, and the last three of us in the seven were born very close together. I was born May 61, Johnny May 62, and Anthony May 63. Right. So we always did stuff together. We're kind of like Irish triplets, And the band was one thing. We just would jam at home, and the ultimate dream was, wouldn't it be great to do a gig, right? And so we did. And again, I was bloody 17, and I booked our first gig at a pub in King's Cross, which now it's not the best of joints. In those days, it was the centre of crime in Australia, right? Like if you got bail, there would be a provision you can't go within 5K of the cross, right? And Mum and Dad's reaction was, oh, good on you, great, enjoy. Mm-hmm. Whereas my kids, I remember saying, where are you going? And said, Dad, at our age, you're going, we were playing a pub in the cross, right? So it just shows you they had a lot of trust and faith and the rest of it. So that's how we started. We did lots of gigs.
And that's with your brothers?
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Just a family, the Cockroaches was just you and you said two other friends.
Yeah. So John and Anthony were the guitarists. I sung because I couldn't play guitar. And drummer Tony Henry went to school with us. We picked up a bass player, and Jeff, who became the Purple Wiggle, was a keyboard player. That's the short story, but yeah,
that's so cool.
And he is a great rockabilly piano player.
Wow, wake up, Jeff.
Exactly. And we I don't know that we could be described as great musicians, and I'm sure Zeg's not a great singer, but we did it. Right, and we had
entertainers.
We had a ball ourselves, and that's like the flu, man. It's infectious, right? So we absolutely could entertain a crowd, and that got our good name going. And so we put out independent singles. We were on TV. We did clips ourselves, mainly independent. And I think with every success, you need a bit of luck, right? Mm-hmm. And so
luck and timing.
Oh yeah, luck and timing. So we were supporting a band at the time who were huge called the Uncanny X-Men, right? And we were supporting them at a place called Selena's in Coogee, in the Coogee Bay Hotel. And it's a big joint, packed out, and there was a record producer there, right, called Charles Fisher, who did everyone from Savage Garden to the Hoodoo Gurus to everyone, right? Big, successful producer. And he just saw the reaction, and it was mainly young women at the show, and we went down a storm. And he was with the head of a record company, said, you going to sign these guys? He went, oh, I don't know. He said, because if you don't, I will. These guys can sell records, all right? And so we got signed. Long story short, we continued to tour and promote, et cetera, and the album came out, and on the Sydney charts, we hit number 2. So that album went gold and went platinum, which
Amazing.
is bloody huge.
That's huge.
And anyway, so we were on, TV shows, radio, press. It was the teenage dream.
And this is from 17 to 21 kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I think. Well, actually, we did a decade. So the big year, the big success was 87.
Yeah.
Right. So that was. That's only probably about 6 years, isn't it? After a bit more than that. Sorry.
Yeah.
From just farting around in a little pub to huge,
That's amazing.
So it was great. And, one of the lessons we learnt after that year was you just thought it'd never end. Well, what's going to change, And anyway, then 1988 rolled around. We had our second album put out. We continued the touring, which Daily Telegraph in the day did a poll of the hardest working bands in music, and the Cockroaches were it.
Wow.
We did, hundreds plural of gigs per year. It was a great era to be in a band. There were nights when we played
every weekend, multiple shows a weekend.
In fact, there were nights we did 3 shows a night.
Wow. Getting equipment around is tough for a band.
Well, see, as you know,
That's
unis have
roadies.
balls,
Yeah.
right? So we do a pub gig, then do an early-ish uni gig, like 11-ish. And this one particular night, there was John's and one other college, and we came on the last gig of the night at 1 a.m.
Wow.
And, still hundreds of people there. It's a great era.
Rock stars. How much fun.
It's great fun. Fun.
I bet. When do you start a family through this period? Because that's obviously the next part of your story.
Yeah.
Starting a family and moving into management rather than being the lead man. Where does that start? Where do you meet your future wife? How does that fall into this story?
Yeah, so I met Pauline pretty soon after leaving school. She went to Sydney University. She's a smart woman, very bloody smart, and I wasn't. And but we had mates who went to uni together. I met through that, and it was a little bit took me back, but I just thought within a real short time, man, she's it. Right? Dare I say, a Cockroaches name of a song, she's the one, right? And so we dated for a few years while I'd learned to become a teacher. And then after 5 years together, I asked her to marry me, and thankfully she said yes. And we had Luke in 1986, just the year before the album went, the Cockroaches album. And then in 1988, I should say, our second album came out. Our daughter Bernadette was born on the 20th of January in 1988.
So this is peak, top of your career, Cockroaches, superstars, thinking nothing can go wrong in life. No, beautiful life, everything's going well, first kid, second kid.
Yeah.
And then tragedy strikes.
Yeah, life was awesome. Not good, awesome.
I bet.
And also communication was tough in those days. So no mobile phones.
You're on tour probably quite a bit. To a couple of young kids at home.
Yeah, and again, some of the things that are meant to be. My father joined the tour. He'd retired from pharmacy, and he just come along as the Irish say for the crack, for the fun. And and in hindsight, he eventually told us, because my brother Anthony, as openly said, he suffers from depression. Dad noted he needed a bit of help, so he joined the road for that reason. Classic Dad.
What a legend.
Anyway, again, I don't know how the world works. The worst things possible happen, and we're living through that now, and the best things possible happen as well. It's just, I don't know, but I'm glad he was with me when Bernadette died. I was up in the north of Queensland. We got a phone call, and he came in to my room, and I could tell something was wrong, like seriously wrong. And he told me Bernadette's dead, and oh man, my brother Anthony was in the room next door, and he said, I just heard you groan, like it was a loud, primal, and life from that millisecond changed, and and she hadn't been sick for a day, you know, and she died from sudden infant death syndrome, which I'd never heard of before. The day it happened, Pauline was with her parents up in the Hunter Valley, right, taking the grandkids to see them. And again, I said communication was tough. I'd actually rung from the hotel room on the phone, the landline, and spoke to Pauline. And Bernadette at 7.5 months was just crawling, I think. And they taught her latest trick and said, I'll get her to speak to you, which is like, friggin' hell, you know, how wonderful, lucky and heartbreaking this was, you know. And she said, ta-ta. So she said goodbye to me, you know, which is, you know, beautiful, but, you know, just bloody hell.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So my daughter actually said goodbye to me, which is beautiful and sublime and heartbreaking.
36 years ago, you said. Yeah, I can see how much I still feel like. Thank you for sharing that. Like, it's just so hard to hear, but I can see how much it means to you. Obviously, still, but like, yeah, like you said, you had no idea about what it was. Your life is perfect at this point, and it can change in an instant.
Yeah, literally.
What does that next period of life look for you? Do you take time off from touring? I'm guessing no. You just tried to bury it. What did it look like for you? Did you get some help? Did you?
Yeah, so that's how I paid my bills. It was like saying to a plumber, "What do you do?" It's this is what I do. And also, I've got to say, even nowadays, but particularly in 1988, when help was offered, it was to Pauline. Like, well, she's the mother. She should get some help. It wasn't even thought of that the bloke would, the father would. And you can tell 36 years later, I'm still ruined by it, you know. And I might add, by the way, that's a good thing. I don't ever want to be non-feeling about the loss of my daughter. I mean, you know what I mean?
Something wrong with you if you're not.
Exactly. And so anyway, at the time, it was just a blur, and we were actually very lucky just in the immediate thing where she was to be buried and the rest of it. And I remember it was up in the country, but the local funeral director said, would you like to see her before, you know, she's buried and the rest of it? And see, in my ignorance at that time, I didn't want to see her dead. So I said no, whereas I've been counselled since, it's a good thing for you to see your loved one.
Closure to say bye.
And just I don't know, take it in on another level, you know. But we also had a friend who was a priest who did a lot of work in Japan after the Second World War. So talk about compassion and suffering and grief on a mega scale. And he was very good. He said, you really need to be involved in the funeral, you know, do what you can. God, it was good advice. And we had a lot of people sing, we had a lot of music, and I carried her coffin to the graveside, which was, again, the hardest thing I've ever done in my life and the most beautiful. It should have been me. I don't want funeral directors to. No, but if she's going to go,
it should be
with
you
me,
going,
mate.
Yeah, good on you.
And you know, there's a lot of things to be said that even in the 80s when I thought, it's the modern world, you look upon other cultures as, that's something ancient and what would they know? Where you know, we know everything now. Boy, we didn't. But cultures where the widow would wear all black once their husband died. And it says to the world, I'm suffering. Something's happened to me. Go easy on me. Back off. Or embrace me or whatever. And, you know, the keening that the Irish do, the wailing, that's appropriate, you know. And, yeah, so the music was a lovely send-off for her. I was great. I'm really grateful I was involved in it. And then really I was back on the road. And Pauline actually did get someone recommended to see. And I was just imploding because, you know, everything had changed, but around me, nothing had. And I remember I went to a phone booth up in Queensland and rang Pauline like at 1 a.m. or something. Just said, I'm a wreck. I need help. What can you do? You know, what can we do? You know, and she said, so she introduced me to a grief counsellor, and he really helped us, you know, and I'm so grateful for that. Just took her through us, and really, that was kind of it. But in '88, the industry was changing as well as this awful change that had happened to us. So we kind of survived and kept going for a couple of years, but the fun had changed. It was still enjoyable to perform, was still popular and would pull crowds and stuff, but the industry changed, and Anthony said, I'm not enjoying it as much. I'm going to go back to uni and finish off my degree in early childhood. And it's like, wow, okay.
Did you mention before that you did teaching too?
Yeah, I taught high school, yeah.
It all comes so beautiful under the umbrella. Wiggles, kids, it makes sense. Obviously, you and your brother have a love for children and educating and inspiring kids. So Anthony says he's going to go back to uni. Yeah,
to finish off. And he was early childhood, whereas I was high school, right? But education was very much a big part of it, and I loved it, you know. And so he finished his degree, and this is the absolute truth. The reason the Wiggles recorded their first album was Anthony wanted to get a job as a preschool teacher, having got his degree. He thought, geez, if I make an album, that's got to be a good sell, right? Hey, I'd like a job here. And by the way, I've made a music album, right? You know,
play with the kids.
And again, back to the luck, and I don't know how the world works, but absolutely great timing. Anthony thought, you know what? I mean, we'd had huge success in the Cockroaches days. He said, I'll take this to the ABC because they were and still are the fortress of early childhood integrity and education and quality, right? And the woman who'd only, I think that week had started running ABC Music, had been at Festival Records where the Cockroaches were. So she knew Jeff and Anthony and thought, well, okay, I don't know how this go, but they know how to write songs. They're quite different. There's no one like them. I'll give them a go. And that's the world's most humble beginning. It started, you know, and then...
Can you go from rock and roll to kids songs? And you're like, let's give it a go. And it was because he wanted to get a preschool job.
That's it. And actually, it was kind of good, as in Anthony did at one of the Cockroaches meetings say, we should make an album of kids' music because I'm studying it. I bloody love it. It's amazing, you know, da-da-da. We're like, it was kind of like saying, let's build a rocket ship. It's like, what?
Yeah, it sounds so left field for a rock and roll band. It's like,
left field and lame too. It was like, what do you mean? You know, like, no. So it was good, actually, because once he finished his degree and got a job, he actually just got mates from uni, and he needed a keyboard player. And, of course, Jeff, right? He rang him up, Jeff from the Cockroaches.
So, Cockroaches have been dissolved for a few years by this time.
Well, we were kind of limping on. We still existed, but not really, you know. And famously, Jeff is always doing up one of his houses or flats or whatever. And he went, and Anthony said, come down to the studio. And he said, oh, look, how long is this going to take? Anyway, so he came down, they recorded the album. And after a year or so, you know, they started doing literally parties, preschool gigs, just really.
You didn't want to get into the singing though, then?
Well, because I wasn't part of it then.
Yeah.
No worries. It's cool, you know. No, and Johnny actually, Anthony offered him to do it, and it was like there wasn't much to be joining.
A side project off the Cockroaches.
Literally, and we had a few. The Cockroaches were still going. We had a rockabilly band called the Sacred Hearts, which is still going, which had Jeff, Anthony, myself, and Tony. It was mainly the Cockroaches, but just different. And then he had this Wiggles thing going, right? Okay. And Johnny wrote songs for the Wiggles. He wrote Hot Potato, right? You know, and. So we're all helping out. I was literally in, you know, the Dorothy costume. Sorry to break the magic out there. So we're all still kind of helping out, but there was nothing really to join, you know, and they kind of kicked it along a little bit. I did other stuff as well. And then...
Red Nose Day, right?
And then, actually the very first Wiggles appearance on TV, before they actually got their skivvies and whatever, I think they were just out of the coloured shirts to colours, was on a Red Nose Day on the Today Show. Yeah.
And that's obviously a very important day for you. Red Nose Days, the day for SIDS and bringing, the charity, which is, based around raising money for the research of SIDS and trying to educate people and change, I guess, what happened to you and your family. And before we spoke off air about the impact that Red Nose Day has had, do we want to go there real quickly and then we'll talk about that first show with Red Nose on live TV, and then we can get into the Wiggles story for a bit. But I'd love to take a moment because this episode is going to come out on Red Nose Day. Right. So I think it's really important to spend a few minutes here educating what SIDS is, what the Red Nose Foundation is. You're far more qualified to share about it than me. So do you want to let us know what the Red Nose Foundation is, what their mission is, and some of the changes that have happened since, I guess, the 90s when this all began.
Yeah. So Red Nose Day is now set up by a company called Red Nose Australia.
Yeah.
They used to be called SIDS and Kids back in the day. Then they became, anyway, that's what their name is today. And back when Bernadette died, the number of children dying from SIDS was high. And so they poured a lot of money into two things: supporting and comforting relatives of those who had lost a baby, right? And God, that's important, right? And then scientific, evidence-based research, which is also invaluable. And they started shortly after Bernadette died, if not around the same time, a safe sleeping campaign. So being a syndrome, there are multiple triggers, and they have lots of advice for you to take. So, a non-smoking household, putting the baby on their back. In those days, we were all taught to put your baby on their belly and head to the sides in case they vomited, they might choke. Well, no baby's ever done that, right? So by putting them on their back, the heat is released. And one of the big triggers is overheating, right? Sleep apnea is the other thing, right, where you have moments of non-breathing. But the big punchline for everyone out there, right, is, don't have any smoke near a baby ever, and with a pregnant woman ever, right? We all know that. And in the cot, keep it free of anything else. In those days, you'd be rugs and blankets,
Teddy bears
and little ones can turn themselves around to end up the other end, right? So cots nowadays, get them in a onesie so they're warm, keep but there's nothing really in the cot with them. And there are a lot of communities and a lot of people who think it's the way things should be and the rest of it, of sleeping with their parent. That's a huge trigger, right? So don't, all right? I know it's a comfort thing, but with a baby, they can be beside you in the cot but not in the same. And the reason is they can overheat. Right, and there can be accidents too. You can roll over and blah blah blah. Now I've spoken to online, which we all know is a disaster. And I remember jumping in on a forum where a woman was saying, I've slept with my kids and I've got 3 or 4 and they've all survived. And I said, aren't you lucky? Right, they call it survivor bias. It doesn't mean it's not true. The fact it didn't happen to your kid, aren't you lucky?
Yeah.
But again, this is scientific, evidence-based research. And here's the proof for all those out there is, since Bernadette died and this safe sleeping campaign, the incidence of SIDS in Australia has been reduced by 80%.
Wow.
I've never heard of a medical campaign that successful. Never. And in real terms, that's over 10,000 people that are alive now that wouldn't if not for this safe sleeping campaign. So apart from SIDS, and that still exists, by the way, right? But also Red Nose does a lot of research and, again, support into miscarriage, stillbirth, all those things. And man, that's just as prevalent, And
miscarriage is like 1 in 4 women. Yeah. It's just unheard of. Like my sister's went through that, and she's been really vocal about it. I'd love to maybe be able to connect you with her one day, because I think you'd be able to have a beautiful conversation with her. But she was one of the first social media people to really start being open and honest and sharing about it. Her sort of, not profile, she was already very, successful and had a lot of attention. But by doing that, she has humanized herself, I think, for a lot of her audience, and went like, wow, I'm going through this. And so many are like, oh, me too. And then started to learn all the statistics around it, how common it is, but there's like this fear and shame around talking about it. So I think having these conversations is so important. And maybe let's just reiterate the things to help, like the education part of this. No smoking around a baby, that's an obvious one.
Yeah.
Don't sleep in the same bed as your baby because it can overheat them.
Yeah.
And have nothing in the cot but a onesie and face up for a baby.
That's correct. Yeah. And when I say you might have a light blanket or something, but go to Red Nose Australia's site and they'll tell it all, right? But it's kind of simple terms there. But also the other big thing, for fundraising, apart from saving lives, and there are, for various reasons, still in Australia, 3,000 little lives passed every year through SIDS, stillbirth, and so on, right? Which is just awful, But the other work they did, I did mention it, is supporting, and they've got a 24/7 grief and support line. And I can tell you, I mean, you saw me a few minutes ago. Jesus, man,
That's so important.
It was it was 36 years ago and it was yesterday is the feeling, you know, and it's and women go through so much actual physical pain, let alone loss that you can't talk about or couldn't talk about in the past, or that's not understood, you know. And same with the partners, the fathers, the parents, the grandparents, the uncles, you know. It's good to know that help is there. And what I want to say is get it.
Use it, yeah.
Because, you know, marriages at the best of times don't last for whatever reason, right? But after the death of your child, it's like 80% of marriages.
Statistics go up massively, I've heard that.
Yeah, and I get it, you know, because, just
Hardest
for
thing
lots
ever.
of reasons. It's just a trauma you'll never face the likes of. And I've got to say, even nowadays, my dad had a great expression, I guess from what he'd seen in his life. Nothing shocks me except electricity, son. Right? And I thought, that is so true. After losing your child, I can have the worst news told to me, and it doesn't mean I don't feel it. I'm not sad for you or your sister or whatever, but I'm not shocked.
You understand.
I just know it's a part of life, you know. I mean, we kind of know that, but we don't live it a lot, you know.
Until it happens to you, you don't recognise it.
That's it. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for going into that, because I know that's going to, for one, like that could save lives, just that conversation we just had.
Yeah.
But definitely go to Red Nose, search on social media, search it on Google to inform yourself if you are a new parent, new grandparent, friend of someone who's got young kids. So important. Let's go to the Wiggles now. The Wiggles is probably one of the most well-known bands. Would you call the Wiggles band?
Yeah, they are.
Wiggles band.
Preschool band.
Preschool band of all time.
Yes.
Globally.
Yeah.
You were the manager, the original manager for them. Is that this? But let's talk about that first live appearance on Red Nose Day, and then, what that progression of the Wiggles went into being one of the most recognised music performances on the planet.
It was interesting, and I guess just to be
did it shock you looking back? Are you like, how the hell did we do that?
It, with a lot of things, it takes a village, right? You know, and also some of the best things start off organic. And with the best intentions, right? So much of what you see in entertainment now is, I want to be big, I want to be famous.
Yeah, what was the why of the Wiggles?
The why of the Wiggles was because Anthony loved the magic of early childhood entertainment, right? And he met similar mates at university, shared that passion. And so, again, like the Cockroaches, let's record. Gee, wouldn't it be good to do gigs? They started off doing it. And I didn't manage them at this earliest of stages, right? There was nothing really to manage. Excuse me. They did have a guy called Jeremy Fabini who had managed the Cockroaches, and he introduced them to the ABC, and they had a guy who booked their gigs originally, and, you know, it was pretty decent level, but, you know, pubs and clubs, not pubs, God help me.
I was about to say, gigs for kids. Where do you
That's
even
the Cockroaches.
This is like RSL clubs maybe, so parents can bring their kids on a Sunday morning.
Sorry. And it was mainly like preschool associations and the rest of it, you know, and it was great because they kind of set up their own network, right? And after about 5 years of existence, or even a bit more than that, they're doing very well. And I did a few things. I worked at the Supreme Court for a judge. I worked at a Royal Commission of Inquiry into the police service. So those 6 years were in a paralegal area that was fascinating. And having that paralegal experience was really helpful, and I knew their world. And Anthony and the Wiggles got to the stage of being very successful and wanting to get to the next stage, and he said to me, do you want to manage us? And the big thing about that was, because I was very successful doing on their own level, he could trust me. That's the number one thing. And I am honest, right? And in the world, not everyone is, right? But also we had the shared experience. So he almost didn't need to finish his sentence. If we'd see something, I knew what he was thinking.
Yeah.
That's it, all right? And so I started booking their gigs in clubs and preschool associations and all the rest of it. And then they were doing clips, and early in the Wiggles' career, Anthony always has some pretty original ideas, right? Creating the Wiggles was the first one. Yeah. And way earlier than that, when in the Cockroaches days, we did over a dozen film clips, which could take days, cost a lot of money. The talent, being the band, we just sit there for most of the time. Okay, you're on, and you know, blah blah blah. Whereas with the Wiggles, you went, why don't we make a full video, like a feature length, 40-something minutes, of every song on the video, which Beyonce did with Lemonade, a few years ago, and everyone said she's a genius, and she is. But Anthony did it in the early 90s with the Wiggles.
Yeah.
A video of every song on the album. Well, he seriously created a genre.
Yeah.
Right? Where parents and carers would get the album, and where's the video? He started that. All right?
Wow.
And, of course, the other guys, absolutely.
Yeah,
Murray and Greg and Jeff, of course. But he was the creative drive. He was the one that said, we should get a choreographer. He was always kind of looking
to dancing and the songs that were good for the kids, but then the video that, I mean, nowadays kids, there's a million things. Click on YouTube and you got Bluey and you got this and you got that, but for a long time, the Wiggles, I remember when I was a kid, like the Wiggles was it, and I'm only 30, so it's like you guys had a market share unlike anything for so long, and now it's evolved into, I guess, the new Wiggles, and your son is now the manager of the new. Like it's such a cool. Give me a story that just blows your mind that you got to do.
Lots of things, but essentially, I started managing them at a good time when they were in a time of development, and I can certainly say about myself, I can sell well if I believe in it.
Is that early 2000s? Late 90s?
Yeah, late 90s, 98, yeah. 97, end of 97, 88.
So this is my childhood, I'm 94, so this is like my prime, like...
That's it, absolutely. And particularly if you believe in something, and it's like, I knew what they're doing was not good, bloody good, right? And different, unique, right? And...
revolutionary.
It really was, and it's interesting. So, we would go with partners overseas to meet with, music labels, video labels, et cetera, and we got a chance with Disney in Australia where they were just starting the Disney Channel. They wanted clips, which are called interstitials. They shot some Wiggles clips, and they were able to chart even way back then. Every time the Wiggles were on and they'd schedule it, their viewers went boom. Boom. Wow. And they went, okay, we need something with Wiggles. So Gary Matheson, as a guy who was a producer at Disney Channel, came to me and said, how about we do a trip to Disneyland? We're sponsored by Qantas and blah, 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 and we'll film it and we'll use those clips and they're ours. I went, yeah, great. So we performed over in Disneyland. We got clips from that, but we also invited Disney and all sorts of overseas American companies to come see us, right? And there's a company called Lyric based in Dallas, Texas, who were the owners and creators of Barney the dinosaur. You probably remember Barney?
Yes, I do remember.
Bigger than Texas. He was huge, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same company, and they signed us. And the big thing at the time was we sounded so Australian, as you can hear. We're Aussies. You can't hide that, right? And for those who can't imagine, it was a different era where Mad Max had subtitles. I kid you not.
Because of the Australian accent.
Yeah, they won't be able to understand it. And so I would have meetings with people saying, mate, this is so good. There's nothing like the music's fantastic, da-da-da. And they go, yeah, but they sound so Australian. And you'd think, gee, what's the problem with that? Well, at the same time, Thomas the Tank Engine, who you would know, a huge brand, early childhood brand that boys loved, very English. When it went to America, they revoiced it to get rid of the English voices with American voices. Now, do you know who they got rid of as the narrator of Thomas the Tank Engine? Ringo Starr, a Beatle.
No way.
I want to meet the bloke, and it would have been a bloke in a suit that sacked Ringo Starr. What the hell?
Oh, my God.
Now, that's the wisdom you're coming up against, right?
Wow.
The suits that know this won't work in our market, blah, blah, blah. So you've got to be a true believer, and I seriously was, as of course, the Wiggles, and I learnt a lot through osmosis through them about early childhood. And I was able to say in those early meetings, listen, take the videos, play it. This was to the company that had signed us, right? Play it to your kids in the preschools and whatever, right? And I also said, look, here I am sounding very Aussie, right? But our audience, the preschoolers, are just putting sentences together, right? They're not exactly 7 years ago. But also an accent in Connecticut is profoundly different from one in Tennessee, y'all. So accents are neither here. They learn through context and action and music and whatever. And eventually, once they did play them to preschool kids, they went, oh, my God, wow. Right. And so they also had a program where Barney, who was huge at that time, would have a video clip at the start before, like a teaser, a trailer. Yeah. They'd play a Wiggles video at the start before the Barney feature started. And they getting feedback. My kid just kept rewinding and watching the Wiggles.
Way.
So the company's going, ooh, we're onto something here. And so it sounds like a Spinal Tap moment, but Barney did a massive season at Radio City Music Hall in New York City. They played to 60,000 punters, and the Wiggles were the support act, right? Which sounds like a bit of a Spinal Tap moment. We came on at the intermission. Now we're going, okay, if you're on an intermission with a rock act, most people aren't going to see you. You know, perhaps not.
Yeah, come back.
But with little ones, if you've got your gear,
yeah, you're not taking your kids back to the bar.
No.
You're waiting there in the intermission.
It's
so
like they're happy. We'll watch this, right? And so 60,000 plus New Yorkers saw the Wiggles, bloody loved them. And in the week that followed, we had 2 videos out with Lyric at that stage. They entered the Amazon top 10 online video sales.
Wow.
Top 10, right? So
early 2000s, mid to
late 90s, late 90s,
90s
right?
Still,
Yeah. And someone at Walmart, the world's biggest retailer, and they're all about sales, said, "Who the hell are the Wiggles, and why don't we have them?"
Wow.
So normally you've got to kind of sacrifice small animals and whatever to get into Walmart. It happened organically through drive and sales. And and then the next big step, Lyric got bought out by a company and we had a TV show, but we couldn't get it on air, right? And I was like, wow, what are we going to do? We're still doing really well in sales of videos and supporting and the rest of it. And then the Disney Channel wanted to launch in the US, their Play School channel. And the new owner came along for Lyric, an English guy who had worked in Australia for Triple M, big radio network, right? And so he knew the Wiggles, right? And he knew Aussies. And he met with me and he said, so take me through the history. And those film clips on the Disney Channel here in Australia, I said, that's what really piqued their interest. He went, great. So he went to the Disney Channel and said, I'll give you these film clips free. And if you dig them, join us, right?
Yeah.
So they had the same reaction. And then we got to the stage of co-launching, as being the major act to launch the preschool channel for Disney in America.
Wow.
And I remember another famous meeting with Disney. Hello.
Wow.
Where all these exciting things we spoke about. And this is before YouTube. Right, so it was streaming and it was huge. They would play our our show 4 times a day. We were on the ads throughout the day, and then they spoke about doing the theme song. So they were telling me, we're going to put you guys on 4 times a day. We're going to launch with you. It's like, wow. And then they said, and we'll get the theme song. So we got these great writers, blah, 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 blah. And this is where you feel a little bit out of your depth. But I just went, that's fantastic. And if you want that, of course, I'm not
we write our own stuff.
But I did say, I said, look, the writers for the Wiggles, they're the reason they've sold, by that stage, millions and millions of CDs and DVDs or tapes as well. So if you're going to introduce me to someone who's done that, sold millions in early childhood, great. But if they haven't, you're better off sticking with these guys, right? And they went with us, which is great, And so that just revolutionised, launched through the roof the Wiggles in America. So we did things like the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade 3 times. We're on the Today Show. Any major show, the Wiggles were on it, right? We sold out 11 shows at Madison Square Garden Theatre.
That is outrageous.
Right. And it just, the celebrities that came to the Wiggles shows that we met.
Because everyone has kids. It's like it doesn't matter what genre you like. If your kids love it, and there's just not, it's just so epic.
It was jaw-dropping, right? And I was lucky, I'd often just go ahead on business or back, and occasionally I'd meet up with them for big events or whatever else and launches and stuff. And I remember they were playing the Beacon Theatre in New York City, which is where the Stones once played, and a great venue. And we got a call about 40 minutes before the show, and they said, Robert De Niro would like to come to the show. Can you fit him in? It's like, I would move my grandparents for Robert De Niro. So, and New York's very heavily unionised because the rest of America's like slave labour. You just can't get paid and you get sacked in a heartbeat. So the unions in Manhattan know if they let it go, it'll never come back. So they're pretty strong. And you go on time, like on the 2nd, otherwise you'll pay a lot of money. Yeah. So they had to go on time. We couldn't wait for De Niro. And a selfless man, mate, I said, you guys go on stage, I'll meet him, okay? And so
Good on you.
he came with his partner, an amazing Amazonian woman, and their little son, right, about 3-year-old boy. And we said good day, and I said, well, I'll show you the seat. I said, look, I had to ask. I said, the guys would love to meet you. Is that okay after the show? He said, yeah, sure. So they sat down, and all of us were watching him. And there were big celebrities in the crowd that night, Jerry Seinfeld, all sorts of people, right, who we'd met many times, right, in the show. But we're all watching him, and it was funny. His partner was like grooving along, and the little boy was, staring loving. He was eating popcorn, like really analysing, thinking, what's he thinking, right, Anyway, the guys are doing their stuff. He comes back afterwards, and he was so lovely, and we just spoke for a while, and, and he went his way. I remember going in the upstairs with Anthony afterwards, and he went, it's just not going to be same if we meet someone from Home and Away, is it? De Niro,
Wow.
Anyway.
Mate, I'm sure you've got a million stories.
Yeah, sorry.
And I'll have to get you back on for a chat again, because this has been one of my favourite episodes I've ever recorded.
Okay.
And I wouldn't, I probably would have once I got to interview the manager of the Wiggles and heard your story. Like, I could just sit here all day listening to it. And I'm sure everyone listening right now would love to. But unfortunately, we have to get ready to wrap this up because of the studio we're in.
Sorry, guys, I talk too much.
No, you don't talk enough. We're gonna catch up again, hopefully, if you're okay with that, because I've absolutely loved this conversation. I would love to know more, but just your story is so special, from sharing about your mum's love of music, your dad's heart attack into his life change, which really helped.
Yes,
I guess you and your brothers have probably this outlook, maybe not the stereotypical rock and roll life.
No.
Like you guys end up being a childcare teacher, a high school teacher. Like you guys have very strong values for what I guess the stereotypical rock band was back then. And I think it really comes back from your parents. So thank you so much for sharing that part of your story. Of course, sharing the part of your story about Bernadette and your daughter is just so hard to hear. But also I think people listening right now will get just some education, definitely, but also maybe some inspiration if they go through something similar, or have somebody in their life go through something similar, maybe to encourage them to seek support, to find the Red Nose Australia, and find some education and some resources to help them through these challenging times. And mate, the Wiggles, what an amazing story. I could talk to you for hours about it, because I've watched so much of the Wiggles, and I'm sure everyone who's listened to this podcast has seen, heard of, and listened to many of the Wiggles. And just hearing the story and getting a bit of a behind the scenes literally, I feel like we've barely even scratched a piece of paint off
There's a
the
doco
World
out there.
Trade
You can
Center.
watch a doco.
Yeah, we'll go watch the doco. But this is even better than a doco, because this is real. You getting to share those moments that are so special. But we will wrap it up here. I do finish. Actually, I want to ask you one more question, because I think this is it's just been sitting on my mind. How hard was it? Because I know you've had more kids after Bernadette.
Yeah.
How fearful were you, and how scary was that?
Yeah, there's a lot of fear.
Asking.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely, it's a very valid question. In fact, I apologise for sharing this, but the CEO of Red Nose Australia just had a grandchild, and she said, "Do you use the breathing monitors under it?" Now that's the CEO, right? Because that's one of the things you can check for is a non-breathing mat, right? If they stop breathing, but often little ones would roll off it. And Claire, we had tested; she didn't suffer from sleep apnea, and we had the mat for a little while. And every time we ran in and it would go off, we didn't think, "Oh, gee," we thought she's dead. Mate, it was too hard. We just went, we can't live with this. So we chose not to. But also, with the fear but also the memories. You can see here, there was one year someone asked me Bernadette's birthday, and I forgot, because she never had a birthday. She was born on the 20th. So in melodramatic field way, I had her name and tattooed and a birth date. And then I thought, oh, gee, so I should have my other kids there as well, which I do. So the family's there.
Beautiful.
And then now with the grandkids.
Nice, you got the other arm going. For everyone watching, listening, not watching, he showed me tattoos on his arms with all of his kids up one arm and all of his grandkids up the other arm.
Yeah, and so and actually Bernadette's on this side, and the grandkids follow, and I thought that's a nice link.
Beautiful.
And someone said, "What if you have more?" I said, "I don't care, mate. I've got plenty of skin left."
I've got lots of arms. Well, mate, this has been amazing. I do finish my podcast with the same question for everyone. I'd love to hear your answer to this. So, what does being a good human mean to Paul Field?
Being a good human is being compassionate and listening. And that's very hard for us all to do, says me yapping away. But compassion, to suffer with. So having been through what we do understand. And that means sometimes being there for them. So, yeah, I think compassion's the big thing.
Well, mate, thank you so much. This has been one of my favourite episodes ever.
Thank you.
I've just really enjoyed this.
Thank
It's
you.
been so inspiring, educational, heartbreaking, but yeah, just amazing conversation. So
Thanks,
thank you
mate.
so much, mate. This has
Pleasure
been
to meet
amazing.
you
Yeah,
too.
you too. You
Yeah.
legend. Well, that was Paul Field, everyone.